what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're finally going to be sitting down to take a look at the Acer XB270HU. That's the new Acer Predator monitor that has the 2560 by 1440 144Hz IPS G-Sync panel that everyone has been talking about, that's really come on the scene just in the past few months and has been a serious contender for the ROG Swift in the marketplace for people that are looking to step up to an enthusiast grade monitor with that 1440p and 144Hz refresh rate. And back, like last year when the ROG Swift first came out, I was really excited by the monitor, so much that I eventually wound up picking one up after I finished my X99 upgrade and got two 980s just a few months ago. Went out, picked up the ROG Swift. I thought, no questions asked, this is the monitor that I want. But then I got it, had some really bad quality control issues with that monitor that I've seen echoed on the forums and Facebook pages out there and in customer reviews on websites like Amazon and Newegg as being problems with that particular monitor, like dead pixels, flickering, the monitor's dying after just a few months. So I went through two ROG Swifts before deciding to finally I wanted to get a full refund and go out and get this monitor instead. And the reasoning behind that was that even if I had gotten a third monitor and that one came and it arrived perfect, pixels were perfect, everything, no problems with it whatsoever, I still wasn't happy with the colors on that screen or the viewing angles. It had some of the worst viewing angles that I have ever seen on a TN panel. And this is coming from having used the Asus PG278Q for almost 2 years and about a year with the G-Sync module that I installed myself in that panel. So I was used to TN panels. I didn't think that it would be any worse or any better than this monitor, but from what I had heard, a lot of people were saying it was actually one of the better TN panels, which I would completely disagree with. It has literally, like I said, like the worst viewing angles I've ever seen on a monitor. When you go off to the side, the screen would look like kind of yellow. It almost looked like a dog pissed on snow. That's the best comparison I could make with how that screen looked, just completely yellow, even sitting straight on. If your eyes would shift to the sides of the screen towards the edges, you would start to see those really bad viewing angles creeping in because it was a larger 27-inch screen. So that's what led me to wanting to get the Acer monitor, because it is IPS. So I knew if I got a perfect screen from Acer, that it was going to be better overall at the end of the day, because it is IPS, so it's going to have amazing color reproduction. It's going to have viewing angles for days that you could just go all the way to the side and not really see any incredible color tone shift or anything like that. There is a slight kind of darkness if you go off to like an extreme side angle, but you really got to be at an extreme side angle, almost looking sideways at the screen to start to see that color shift creeping in. So but it's nowhere near as bad as what you would see on a TN panel, let alone the ROG Swift, which, like I said, one of the worst I've ever seen. So if you were to look at these two panels side by side, in the aesthetics department, the Asus ROG Swift, I think, would win in spades, no questions asked. It's got a nice matte finish, super slim bezel, and a nice rectangular angled base that just looks really attractive and has a nice gamer aesthetic to it. And looking at the Acer XB270HU, it's basically the exact opposite. You have a very generic glossy finish stand. Do not like glossy finishes on pretty much anything. And, to add to that, just beyond the aesthetic, it actually has an impact on the monitor itself because there are reflections. You could see reflections of yourself in the edges of the screen, and also on the very interior of the bezel, you can actually even see reflections of what's being displayed on the screen itself. Along the bottom, you can see taskbar icons being reflected on the edge of the bezel. Looking at the top, if I have a browser open, I could see whatever my active tab is because it turns gray. I could see that reflected on the interior of the bezel as well. So that's something you should definitely consider if you're the type of person that would get really annoyed by these sorts of things. For me personally, though, I'm willing to put up with those few minor gripes like the glossy finish because of the fact that the screen itself is absolutely beautiful. I have never seen a screen better than the one that's on the Acer XB270HU, let alone still hitting that 144Hz refresh rate, having G-Sync, all that good stuff. And despite the fact that it is IPS, they've managed to get it down to only 4 ms response time. So you got a 4 millisecond gray to gray response time, which is still very fast. It's not as fast as the 1 millisecond we see on the ROG Swift, but it's really not that impactful in games from what I've seen. I've done a few tests using motion blur tests like the UFO test, which you'll be seeing on your screen here, to try to test it for ghosting. And I tested it side by side with my Asus PG278Q because that's a TN panel with a 1 ms response time and 144Hz refresh rate. And I could tell you that there was definitely far less ghosting on the Asus monitor, but it really wasn't that bad on the Acer panel itself. It's something I could definitely put up with, and in games, it wasn't something that I really noticed it at all. It's really something I would have to sit down and pay attention to actually be able to perceive it, because it really, like I said, it's really not that bad, not anything noticeable. I thought the 4ms response time was going to be, bad when it came to this panel, but, thankfully, it's really not. Now, it's also worth noting that this monitor does support ULMB, that's ultra-low motion blur technology. Unfortunately, to utilize the ULMB, you are only going to be limited to 85 and 100 Hz, and you also have to disable G-Sync to use it. Now, given the choice between using ULMB or G-Sync, I would choose G-Sync every single time, because I've been using it for about a year and a half now, and it's not something I could imagine gaming without after having used it for that extensive period of time. If you're not familiar with what G-Sync does, it basically gives you the ultimate smooth gaming experience that you've always wanted. If you ever had to make the choice between using V-Sync or turning V-Sync off because you basically had to decide, well, do I want stuttering and input lag, or do I want tearing? Because that's basically the choice that a lot of gamers were left with, for the past decade or so, ever since we really started using LED monitors. If you turned V-Sync on, you'd get that really bad input lag, as well as stuttering if you drop below your monitor's native refresh rate. Adversely, if you turned it off and went over your monitor's native refresh rate, then you would incur some pretty bad tearing. So those are two things that gamers have just kind of been dealing with ever since we've moved on from CRT monitors. Thankfully, with G-Sync, you don't have to make that choice anymore. You could just turn that on and you have a completely dynamic refresh rate, so your monitor actually adjusts its refresh rate dynamically according to the frames that are being output by your graphics card. And this, like I said, this is something I could not live without anymore. It just makes your gaming experience completely silky smooth, no matter what type of frame variance you're getting. I could go from getting 150 frames all the way down to 70 frames and not miss a beat. Unless I'm sitting there actually watching the frame rate counter, I'm not going to notice it. Not at all. Even if I were to drop down a little bit below 60, down to 50 frames, I'm not really going to be able to perceive that difference all that much unless I'm really, really watching my frame rate counter. But if I turn off my frame rate counter, not a big deal at all. And I can't recommend G-Sync enough for your next panel. If you have an Nvidia card that supports it, or if you're on the AMD side, then you could do something with FreeSync. I don't have any hands-on experience with G-Sync, but I'm sorry, with FreeSync. I know it does have some limitations as far as the refresh rates that it supports, but I would like to get hands-on with it one day so that I could do an actual side-by-side comparison between the two. All of your basic ergonomic features are covered with the Acer Predator, your tilt, pivot, swivel, and height adjust. As far as connectivity goes in this monitor, you are going to be somewhat limited as it is a G-Sync panel, so it only has DisplayPort. That's the only input you get. Besides your basic, power in, you've got your DisplayPort, and that's it. And that's just really a limitation of G-Sync, because in order to use G-Sync, you're going to need to use DisplayPort, and also for the 144 Hz, another thing you're going to be needing to use DisplayPort. You could, if they had dueling DVI, you could run that to get 144 Hz support, but then you'd be missing out on G-Sync. So unless Acer were to go ahead and install another full-size scaler inside the monitor itself, then that's really the only way that they could have gotten extra connectivity. So for G-Sync, you have to use DisplayPort, so that's just a limitation you're going to have to deal with if you decide to go out and pick up this monitor. Besides that, there are also 4 USB ports, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the left side. So you do have those extra options there if you're wanting to maybe charge something at your desktop or hook something in, then you've got that extra option there, so you don't have to worry about reaching around the backside of your computer to fiddle around in the dark. So the menu options on this monitor are also extremely limited. Once again, that's something because of G-Sync. You have your basic options in there, like brightness, contrast, gamma, things like that. But if you're looking to do any serious color correction, then you're going to have to do that either in Windows or the Nvidia control panel, which is where I chose to do all of my color corrections. And to do my color calibration, I actually use an old album cover from Iron Maiden, which I'll put a link to down in the description below. I'll upload that image that I use. And I use that because it has really, really deep blacks and also has reds, blues, yellows, oranges, even a little bit of green, I think. So it's got the full color gamut that you would need to be able to calibrate a monitor correctly. And it's something that I've been using for years, and I don't have any plans to stop using soon. One thing I also wanted to note is about the quality control issues with this particular monitor. A lot of people have been saying, oh, this monitor is having a lot of the same issues that the ROG Swift is having with dead pixels and dead monitors on arrival and people having to RMA them. And that is 100% true. I've seen that all over the forums, on Amazon, things like that. I've been fairly lucky as I've got a good monitor with no dead pixels. I do have sort of like almost like a smudge that's actually behind the panel itself, which you could see on your screen here, hopefully. My camera was able to pick it up, so if you see that, that's basically what I'm talking about, but it only shows up in super ultra black things, like basically when I'm turning the monitor on or off, sometimes in a loading screen, but it's really not that bad, and it's something I'm willing to put up with this monitor because the screen is so beautiful beyond that, and it's something I can deal with for the next like 6 months or so until a new monitor comes out that I want to get. Really, the next monitor I have my eyes on is like a 21:9 144Hz IPS G-Sync. Basically, this monitor, but 21:9. That's basically my next future monitor upgrade. And until that time comes, when that monitor hits the store shelves and I'm able to pick it up, I'm going to be living with this monitor every day because the picture on it, you know, outside of that minor issue, is absolutely gorgeous. And maybe when I get the 21:9, I'll actually RMA this with Acer for having that issue and take my chances with getting a replacement. But right now, I can't incur the downtime of going without the 1440 display, so I'm choosing to deal with it. But you guys should know about that ahead of time. But at the end of the day, I just have to say I'm really, really pleased with this monitor. Could not recommend it enough. You should know that there are some quality concerns out there about this monitor. I have heard about people getting dead pixels, things like that. But if you go and pick it up at like a micro center, if you're able to, then you can test it in the store so you can know for sure ahead of time whether you're getting a bad display or not. But, you know, if you get a perfect display, then this is going to be the better monitor compared to the ROG Swift. For just straight up picture quality, this thing runs laps around the ROG Swift for color reproduction and viewing angles. Absolutely beautiful display, excellent white uniformity across the entire panel. Blacks are really, really deep and rich. Just can't say enough good things about the actual picture quality on this monitor. Throw in on top of that you have 144Hz IPS 1440p G-Sync. It's got everything on paper you could possibly want in a monitor, and it performs extremely well. Unfortunately, I do have some of those quality control issues, so, you know, be forewarned about that. But if you do get a perfect screen, then it's going to be better than the ROG Swift. So given the choice between the two, I would take this monitor every time because the ROG Swift is having the same exact, quality control issues as Acer. So, you know, basically, you're going to get a better monitor if you get a good one from Acer as opposed to the ROG Swift. Even if you get a good monitor, it's still going to be a pretty shit monitor, in my opinion. I know some people out there disagree and they love their ROG Swifts, and that's great. More power to you. I'm glad you're enjoying your experience on the ROG Swift. But for me, I'm a little bit more picky when it comes to my color reproduction and my viewing angles, so not really the monitor for me, especially for professional use, doing video editing and stuff like that. It's just not a monitor I could use as sort of like my daily driver on my desktop. That's just not something that I could put up with. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, please stick a thumbs up on it below. And if you want to find out more details about the Acer monitor and support my channel, then you could use my Amazon link down in the description below. Besides that, I will catch you sluts next time. Ciao.